The content of this podcast, Generation Mom, is for entertainment purposes only. The views and opinions expressed by the host and their guests are their own and do not constitute professional advice. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, this podcast is not intended to replace or substitute for any professional, medical, financial, legal, or other advice. Always seek the advice of a qualified professional with any questions you may have regarding your specific situation. Thanks for listening.
I think it's great that in this day and age, that's all recognized. Because when I was having children, there was no such thing as postpartum depression. But I had it. I had no support from anybody, and we didn't really have the nurses to come and help you and all of that. And got into this really dark place, and I wasn't sleeping because I was afraid she was going to die during the night, and I had to watch over her. And it was really awful. And I needed to be on some medication or something, but I just white knuckled it. And when I tried to talk to somebody about it, doctors about it, they looked at you like you had two heads. Like, why are you having those thoughts?
Hello, and welcome to Generation Mom. I'm Rachel, the elder millennial who tries to stay grounded in all of the chaos of modern parenthood.
I'm Pam, the boomer mom to my two co-hosts and Nana to their kids. I've seen it all, and I'm here to share my generational wisdom with a touch of tough love.
And I'm Laurel, your Gen X voice of reason, stuck in the middle, ready to weigh in with unsugar-coated advice.
Join us as we tackle life's big questions across 3 generations, sharing laughs and insights along the way. This is Generation Mom. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you. How are you?
Good.
It's been 2 weeks.
It's been 2 weeks, so we're catching up on our recording. And last time we talked about parenting styles, and we had a really great conversation. And so today we're going to dive into part 2 of that conversation about raising babies. And we're all past the baby stage.
For sure.
For sure, especially mom. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, how things have changed with baby rearing for the 3 of us, between things like sleeping and breastfeeding and just general baby things that we can remember. But something that we talk about often that I wanted to just do a quick deep dive into is the history of car seats. It wasn't until 1979 that there was the first child restraint law, aka car seat law, and that was in Tennessee. And it wasn't until 1985 that all states passed laws requiring the use of car seats. In 1987, only 80% of children used a car seat. It wasn't until 1959 that the 3-point seatbelt was invented. So that's the shoulder strap seatbelt that you have in front seats.
Wow.
Before then, it was just a waist belt. And keep in mind, there's no laws then about requiring you to wear it. It wasn't until 1961, Wisconsin became the first state to require seatbelts. And it wasn't until 1968 that seatbelts became nationally mandated. And so then you have in 1979 the law about car seats. And even now, with the exception of New Hampshire, all states in the District of Columbia require adult front seat occupants to use seatbelts. Adult rear seat passengers are also covered by laws in 33 states. In the District of Columbia, children are covered by separate laws. And I feel like now we've got kids in car seats till they're almost teenagers, whereas I can remember being 6 years old and riding in the bucket seats of Dad's Mazda RX-7, and that was the height of safety.
I don't remember a time when I wasn't riding in the front seat, and that just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, kids are not in the front seat. I remember we were watching the Bluey episode. Bluey had that special 30-minute episode. Oh, Laurel's wearing her bluey shirt today. And in Queensland, Australia, it's okay for a child over the age of 6 to sit in the front seat as long as all the back seats are occupied. So I don't know if we have laws like that in America, but I thought that was interesting. So, Mom, I know you talk a little bit about remembering what it was like when you were a kid in the car. Can you share some of those memories?
There weren't really any seatbelts or car seats when I was a kid. And so what we used to do is we used to stand up on the front seat while the car was driving so we could see better. And then my seatbelt was my mother's arm coming across my chest if she had to stop short or something. And then the other thing was that how the seats are stationary now, there used to be a thing where you could fold the front seat down and get in the car into the back seat if the car only had 2 doors, which was common back in the 50s. So that if the car stopped short, that back would snap forward. It would propel you right into the windshield. The only car seats that I remember us having were these little seats. We were in like a car seat, but there was no protection, and there was usually a steering wheel in front of us so that if the car got in an accident, you would smash your face right into that. And the other kind of things that they had to put babies in was these sort of bassinets, which they'd put on the seat in the back seat. So if the baby was really small, that's where they would go. Nobody cared about us back then. But I do remember, let's see, Laurel was born in 76. And I do remember the pediatrician that I went to see saying that it would be a good idea if we got a car seat for her. But you know how the car seats are rear facing now? I don't remember that they were rear facing.
I thought it was funny when I was researching. It said originally child seats started out as nothing more than burlap sacks with a drawstring that hung over the headrest on the passenger seat.
You have to put your baby somewhere while you're driving.
But the seats were really designed just to lift the child to allow them to look out the window and keep the child more or less in one spot in the car. So they were really child restraints.
Yeah.
Containment devices.
I did carpooling. This is terrible to admit now, today, but we decided in our meeting, our carpool meeting, that it would be a good idea to put the kids in seat belts. But sometimes we had more kids than seat belts, so we double seat belt the kids, which is so dangerous. When I think about it now, my skin crawls. But what did we know? We didn't know anything. There weren't any safety regulations, and it just was so dangerous. Now, if you carpool, you have to have a car seat for each kid. But there were no laws like that back then. Mm-hmm. I guess seat belting them together was better than what I grew up with, which was nothing, or my mother's arm coming across.
Now they have so many different kinds and brands of car seats. And we have the Graco one, the Grow With Me one that like goes from an infant to it becomes a backless booster. So what were views around things like breastfeeding or sleep training? Like what was the common practice?
Okay, breastfeeding was a little bit controversial when I had Laurel. It was becoming more popular to breastfeed your kids, and most of the literature said it was healthier, which it is. But then you had your mother, and my mother thought that breastfeeding was barbaric, and she didn't breastfeed any of us. And so when I said that I wanted to breastfeed, she was pretty horrified that I wanted to do that. And she also was very insulting. She told me that my breasts were too large for me to breastfeed and that I wouldn't be able to do it discreetly because of the size of my breasts. And of course, you weren't supposed to breastfeed in public then. That was scandalous at that time. Although that's my generation was the generation who did start to do that. Some of us were braver than others and could get around our mothers better. But so I did try to breastfeed Laurel, but I got so much negative flack about it. It really made it difficult. And as you both know, it's hard enough to breastfeed without having somebody criticizing you for it. Eventually, I did put her on a bottle, and she was much happier actually, because I think I was less tense, and the babies can feel that. And then with you, Rachel, I didn't even try. I was defeated, which is too bad. I feel bad about that. I really do. I have some regrets about that. I think you have to go with what you're feeling most comfortable with. Now, I'm an advocate for breastfeeding. I think it's very good, especially in the first 6 months or so of a child's life. But I didn't have the support. And I think it does take some support in order to do that successfully.
So I wanted to talk to you, Laurel, about your journey with breastfeeding babies and what were some of the attitudes around breastfeeding for you at the time?
For us, breastfeeding was, I think, regaining popularity. I think prior to sort of me becoming a parent or those years ahead, formula was very normal and expected. And I think a lot of the parents going back to work sort of thing and all of that plays into that. But it was I came up in the era of all the sort of crunchy mom stuff. And all the research coming through about breastfeeding being what's best for the child and all of that. So I absolutely intended to breastfeed. That was a big priority for me. With my first child, I had a very traumatic birth experience. And so I had a hard time initially nursing him. And then I ended up with an infection soon after and in the hospital for a couple days after that. And they scared the crap out of me there because I was on all the medication and antibiotics and everything. And it's like the doctors handed me formula and closed the door on my nursing experience. And now I look back and I realize I could have got that train back on the course, but I didn't understand that then. I didn't realize that then. I was going through so much. And my son, once he had the bottle, he didn't have a lot of interest in nursing directly anymore, except at night. He did like to nurse to sleep at night. And when he woke up at night, he would want to. So, right about until your wedding, so like 4 or 5 months, he was getting bottles during the day and nursing at night. And I was a horrible pumper. I couldn't get more than an ounce or two in a pumping situation. And so then after that, he weaned off and I just gave him bottles after that. My younger one, I was bound and determined. I was not going to let that happen again. And when we were in the hospital, I ended up with my second C-section, which I didn't want. And we were in the hospital so long that he was losing a lot of weight. And of course, when you're there for a day with a normal birth, they send you home. They don't worry about it. But because we were there and it takes a little bit of time for the milk to come in, he spent those first days totally attached to me, just from one side to the other. But I guess he wasn't getting much of anything yet. And so they started stressing me out about his weight loss. And so they started bringing in the formula and the bottles and everything. And I'm like, no, this is not happening again. And I fought back then. And you get to that point, you just want to go home. And they wouldn't release me till he had put on some weight. And so I think I gave him a couple of these itty bitty bottles just to get out of the hospital. And then when we got back home, as soon as you're home in your own house, in your own bed, like the faucets turn on. And he was perfectly happy to just sit there. And I'm telling you, that kid would still be nursing now if he could. And so overall, we had a much better experience. I did have a sort of medical issue with him too that I had to fight through. It was extremely painful. And I'm trying to remember all the symptoms, but not so much on the nipple, but like inside, like in my breast. And I get like this sort of cold feeling in my breast and nipple, and it was very painful. And I was going to a breastfeeding group at the hospital nearby. And I think my older son was in school or daycare at the time, preschool. And so I go, and I just got lucky. I was explaining what I was going through, and another mother there said, I think this is what you have. Here's the name and number of a woman who helped me. And I forget what it was now, but basically they put you on blood pressure medication. And I forget the whole situation now, but it does something to help it not feel that way. And once I got on that medication, I stopped having that feeling, and then eventually got to the point where you don't notice it at all. You don't feel it at all. And that led to me nursing him forever. That was good. It's something I don't think if I'd walked into a doctor's office, they ever would have thought of. But because I happened to just meet up with that one woman, and she gave me the name of a nursing specialist, a sort of, I don't know if she was a postpartum doula, but she has a business helping women with lactation. She's a lactation consultant and all that. That was a much more positive sort of situation. Yeah.
I had a very similar experience with my first. I also had a slightly traumatic birthing experience with her, and I lost a lot of blood. And that's a whole nother story, but they did not give me a blood transfusion, which they should have. And so because of that, my milk never really came in. And I remember she was a cluster feeder, probably because she wasn't getting anything. Like she wasn't getting a lot. And it hurt a lot. And we went, and the lactation consultant was very nice, and she had me on iron supplements and was trying to like get that figured out. And we had what is it called? A lip tie revision done, which was traumatic for me to watch that. So I tried my best to breastfeed her. And I remember sitting in bed one night Googling, is it okay to stop breastfeeding my daughter? And I think I wanted to breastfeed again because I knew that it was definitely a breast is best environment, and I knew it was healthy, but my mental health was struggling, and it was struggling because she was trying to feed all the time. She was also losing some weight, so I had the pediatrician as well saying I was going weekly to weigh her, and she was a big baby, so even though she was losing some weight, like they were like, we'll let you try for a few more weeks, and then we're going to start talking about formula. And so as I was Googling in the middle of the night, I came across a story about a woman who did combination feeding. So what you ended up doing too, she would breastfeed her daughter first, and then she would give her a bottle. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up doing that for a little while, where I would, feed her a little bit, and then I would breastfeed her for a little bit, and then I'd give her a bottle. And we did that till she was about 5 months old. And then I was just done. She seemed to really like the bottle. She was happy. She was sleeping so much better with the bottle. Like we were getting so much sleep. Like we were both doing much better with the formula. So I was glad I had made that decision. And I wish I hadn't beat myself up about it, but I did. When I had my son, it was a much better labor and delivery, but I did lose a lot of blood. I guess I'm just a bleeder. I don't know. But again, luckily I was with a different practice, a different hospital, And they let me go one night and they said, we're going to keep you one more day. And if your hemoglobin doesn't go up, we're going to give you a blood transfusion. And they did end up giving me a blood transfusion. And I think that made all the difference in the world because my milk came in right away. I was like a pumping champ and he did great. He still lost some weight, but you all saw him.
Mm-hmm.
He was thriving he was a chubby kid. He was bigger than my daughter was. And he breastfed exclusively through about 8 months. And even all the time we'd go in and he was this huge chubby baby. And every time we would go to the pediatrician, they were like, he's low on the birth weight chart. They're looking at the chart, but not at the baby. And I would tell you guys about these appointments.
We
laugh. He was so chubby. Yeah. You had much more milk with him. You were a milk machine.
Yeah.
With your daughter, you didn't really have that much. But with him, you had a plentiful supply of milk.
I did. And we kept it up until about 8 months. And then I just decided like I needed my body back. I wanted my autonomy back. And so I stopped, but I stopped too fast. And I got really horrible postpartum depression because of the hormone shift. And I don't know if I shared with you guys, but I was seeing a therapist and it was scary. I was having really dark thoughts. I was really depressed and I was scared because I hadn't really felt that before. Like I had anxiety PA with my daughter, but this was scary. And luckily I was already seeing a therapist and she suggested that I should be on anti-anxiety medication. And that saved my life, I think, because I was in a very dark place and I had this beautiful baby. I had my daughter, I had my husband. I felt like I should have been so happy, but I was just, and it was really, I think, because I didn't really wean very slowly. And so I think it was the shift in the hormones. And so I think a lot of people don't realize that too, that it can be delayed because I was having the postpartum experience with him. Oh, we're so in love and it's wonderful. And then all of a sudden at that 8 months when I weaned, it really freaked me out because all of a sudden it was like I was just in this dark place. So hopefully that'll help somebody if they're thinking about if they're experiencing something similar. It can happen later than just right after having a baby. So
I think it's great that in this day and age that's all recognized, because when I was having children, there was no such thing as postpartum depression. But I had it. And I had it probably the worst with Laurel. And it also was around the breastfeeding issues because I felt like a failure and I couldn't breastfeed. And I had no support from anybody. And we didn't really have the nurses to come and help you and all of that. And got into this really dark place. And I wasn't sleeping because I was afraid she was going to die during the night. And I had to watch over her. And it was really awful. And I needed to be on some medication or something, but I just white knuckled it. And when I tried to talk to somebody about it, doctors about it, they looked at you like you had two heads. Like, why are you having those thoughts? Your baby's perfectly fine. Snap out of it? Kind of thing. So I really envy you guys because you get listened to, which is nice.
I don't know if it was like this for you, but I know when I would go to the pediatrician with both my kids, after those first few, right after having the baby, they screen you
Right.
for postpartum now. So they have a questionnaire that they ask you a bunch of questions. And with my daughter, I don't think I answered very honestly
Right.
because I was like, they're going to take this baby away from me.
Right.
If I say that I'm depressed or I'm not like totally fine. And
Well, and it's very obvious what the right answers.
yeah.
And I had the same sort of thing. Like and as someone who's had lifelong bouts with depression and anxiety, you have a hard time drawing that line between what is just me being me and what is the result of the pregnancy. But I also had, and it was somewhat delayed, not as delayed as yours, but the summer after my son was born, my second one, and it was weird for me because it wasn't about my baby, it was about my older son. That was what the sort of depression was focused on. But I was very alone that summer, whereas when I had my first son, my husband was working from home. He was very involved. I had you guys all around me. With my second son, my husband was working full-time and in school full-time, so I never saw him. He was never around. My parents were out of the country for an extended period of time. And I was very much on my own. And it was summer, so we had nothing going on. And I was dealing with this new baby. I was dealing with difficult toddler who I was going through a whole diagnostic process with him, dealing with those doctors, dealing with that insurance. You get to this very scary, dark place, and you're aware enough to know, or I was, to know this isn't okay. These feelings I'm having are not okay. And I have memories of Andrea Yates and what was the woman who drowned her kid, Susan
Smith.
These events that have happened in my life, and as a non-mother, I would look at that and think, how does that even happen? Like, what even goes through your mind that this is okay? And then you reach a point where you're thinking those things and you realize you really rationalize it. For me, I thought it would make my husband's life better. It would be easier for everybody. You start rationalizing all this stuff. And that's when I went, oh, there's something really, this is not okay. This is not normal. And then I had in that moment where you can barely deal with anything and you've got so much piled on you, then you have to start trying to find people who deal with postpartum depression specifically and who take your insurance and who have openings and all of that. And that's the last thing you want to be dealing with when you can barely make yourself breakfast or whatever. Eventually I found someone wonderful, and then she moved out of state, which couple years later she moved out of state, which was very traumatic. But she was wonderful, and she got me on medication also, and she helped me through those tough years, to deal with my older son and deal with all the guilt I had around my younger son and all of that. So it happens, and you just have to hope you have a support system and deal with it.
But at least today, these mental health issues in general and around pregnancy and birth and all of that are accepted and are identified, and you aren't made to feel like you should be put into a mental institution right away, or your children should be taken away.
Yeah.
And the dark thoughts I was having, I would never tell anybody what they were, because I was convinced that the Child Protective Services would show up. But I was very afraid. Because I would have these visions of giving her a bath and her slipping in the bathtub and drowning and all these terrible things. And I'm going, but no, that's not going to happen because I'm right here with her. But what if this and what if that? And I had a tremendous amount of guilt, not only because I felt at times that I wasn't adequate to take care of my baby, but that I was having these thoughts. And how could I have these thoughts? I had this beautiful little girl. Mm-hmm. And what is wrong with me? There really is something wrong with me. Maybe the men in the white coat should come and take me away. And I had no one to turn to. Absolutely no one. And that was really hard. And people didn't talk about it like they do today. And I don't know. I wonder sometimes how I got through it. And I thank God that I knew that what I was thinking was not right. And I didn't slip into a psychosis, which I guess I could have very easily and done something that I would regret for the rest of my life. And so it made me hyper vigilant to her instead of, but my thoughts were about her being harmed. But that made me hyper vigilant, not want to go through with the harm. I guess I was lucky in that. I don't know. I worry about that now because I think how alone I really was. And I think it's so wonderful that you have today, they listen to you and you get on medication and your parents understand it. And you were just looked at as crazy. So, of course, you didn't want to really share it with anybody.
When with my daughter, I think I white knuckled the postpartum anxiety because I was scared to tell anybody because I thought there was something wrong with me. Some of the thoughts, the intrusive thoughts I would have. And I didn't do a lot of things with her because I was scared. Like, I remember not wanting to go to the grocery store with her because I thought I was going to drop her in the parking lot and hurt her head. I was scared about even just like walking around the neighborhood. What if somebody kidnaps us in the neighborhood? Like, I had all of these intrusive ideas of things that would happen to her and she would get hurt. And I remember just thinking, I just must be crazy. I don't know what's going on because I didn't feel depressed, but everything scared me. And it was the anxiety. And so I'm thinking, oh, postpartum depression, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed and I wouldn't be able
Oh,
to
that's not
take
true.
care of her. And so I didn't understand that's what was going on until I was through it. and then I started to learn more about it and that other people have that too. It sounds like we had a similar.
Yeah. You did come and talk to me about it. I don't know if you remember, but you were here one day and you didn't look very good. And I started probing. And the next thing I knew, you were in tears telling me what. Mm-hmm. And I think I told you then that what you were going through was normal and that I had experienced it too. And which I think just helps to know that you're not alone.
Yeah, it does. It does. I think the sleep is another thing that probably also contributes to PPA and PPD, but also I wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the ideas about sleeping and how you approach the whole baby sleep thing with your kids.
Sleep was considered a good thing. It's something that babies should do, and they should do it in their own beds. So, from the time that we brought you home from the hospital, both of you were put into your own crib in your own room. And I remember one of the biggest fights that I had with your father was that there was one night when Laurel was cried and cried and cried, and I kept going in and taking her out of the crib and rocking her and all of that. And then finally, your father said, "Okay, that's it. You're not going to go in again." And I said, "But she's crying. I've got to go in." "No, you're not going in again." And we had this huge fight, and he sat on me and wouldn't let me go in. And finally, she went to sleep. And I was up the entire night because I'm worrying, oh my God, she choked to death. She threw up. She did that. I had all of these things that I'm thinking of that must have happened to her. And I go running in there in the morning, and there she is, smiling and putting her arms over her to take her out of the crib. And I thought, oh my God, that was terrible. So, yeah, our generation thought you should let them, or some people like your father, thought that we should let them cry it out.
My older one doesn't sleep, and that would be even as a little kid, he'd be up past midnight jumping around in his crib. Initially, he slept in I have, I guess, a co-sleeper next to the bed initially, but that didn't last very long. I was scared for him to be in the bed with me. He slept in the swing for a really long time, and you're not supposed to do that. But that was the only way we could get him to sleep. And so we had, and I still remember the little song playing all night long in the bedroom. And he'd swing, it would click back and forth. And then he got too big for that. And then we got to a point, and I did it slowly. Like I started with naps where I'd put him in his crib, and he would sleep in the crib hopefully. And then at night I started putting him in the crib, but even then he'd wake up for his bottle in the night. And I'd end up with him in the bed for the rest of the night. And then as he got a little older past the baby stage, then he would be jumping in his crib and flopping around and stuff. My younger son is different in his sleep. He tends to go, and then the minute he sees a pillow, he is out cold. He just is out. And he sleeps through the night, and he's an early riser. He's just like his dad. He slept in the bed with me for a good bit, mostly because, again, I was nursing, so that was easy. He could just help himself. And then again, I started with naps, putting him in the crib, and then moved to bedtime, and that went really well. And he was sleeping all night in his bed. And then at some point, he figured out he could climb out of his crib. My older son never figured that out and was actually in his crib for a really long time. And one of the most traumatic things we ever did to him was convert his crib to a toddler bed. And I regret that, but I think he was 3 at that time. It wasn't like it was unreasonable. My younger one, we converted the crib before 18 months because he was climbing out of it. And then he'd get upset because his lovey or his passy or something would be in the crib and he couldn't get to it. And that was that situation. And then he'd come and get in bed with us. So I converted it to a toddler bed. And then once he could move around as he wanted to, like I was sitting outside his room at night and he'd peek out of his door and I'd say, go back to bed. And that would go on. And then eventually I'd give up and go downstairs and he'd be in the bedroom or he'd fall asleep at the top of the stairs. He'd like to sleep at the top of the stairs. Yeah, that's how our sleeping journey was, I think.
Yeah, with our daughter, we had a co-sleeper that you put in the bed. It was like a little bassinet, but it went in between my husband and I. And she slept in that. And then we had the pack and play in our bedroom where she slept there for a while. And then, so she was always a good sleeper and she slept for a long time. And she did it, like once we got her on the bottle, she slept a really long time. But we got to the point where we wanted her in her own room. And so I remember doing like a little bit of sleep training with her. And she took to it really easy. And it was just like, they call it the pick up, put down method. And they like pick them up and then put them in the crib. And then I forget what the point is to like, if they start fussing, you pick them up and then you put them down, you let them fuss for a few minutes. And then if they, I don't know, you just do that over. And we did that for a week. And then she was great. And then she loved her crib and she slept in that crib till she was almost 4, I think, 3.5. And it was when she finally figured out how to climb out. But she was really good at climbing out. Like she was an expert. But it was funny because she, at one point, you're not supposed to have anything in the bed, in the crib with your baby anymore. You've got to have nothing. And so when she was a baby, there was nothing. And then she was really funny because she had this bus she wanted to go to bed with. And it was a hard toy bus. Yeah. It was not a stuffy. So she had that for a while. And then she got into stuffed animals. And so then it got to the point where there were so many stuffed animals in her crib and she had like just this little place for her body, but she loved it. And so we would rock her before bed and then she would say, okay, I want to go in my crib now. And we would put her in the crib and she would just disappear into all these stuffed animals. And so we had our son, and at around the same time we had, I think right before we had him, we converted to the toddler bed. And then she just wanted to sleep in bed with us. Like she would start out in her bed, and then she'd realize she could get up in the middle of the night and walk down the hall and get in bed with us. My son hates sleep. He's finally likes it more, but he didn't sleep. The only time he would sleep was in the bed with me attached to my boob. And I remember there was one night he slept in the pack and play for 7 hours straight. And that was the only time he slept through the night when he was a baby. The only other time was when we tried to put him in his crib. We had this cute, wonderful nursery set up for him. And he slept through the night once because we were trying to do sleep training with him. And I remember we were doing not cry it out, but like you let them cry for a while and then you go in and check on them. And I put him in the crib and he just went to sleep and slept through the night. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was so easy. It was great. And I wake up the next morning and I felt horrible because he had a raging fever. He was so sick and he only slept because he wasn't feeling good. And so this kid, I spent so much time trying to get him to sleep in a crib by himself. And I would get in the crib with him and I would because I'm a 5 foot tall person, and I would sleep in this crib with him and he would fall asleep. And then I would creep out of the crib like ninja, try to get out. And then I'd go lay down. And then probably 2 hours later, he'd be up and crying for me again. And so at one point we just gave up. And he's been sleeping in our bed ever since. And he sleeps really great in our bed. And it was the only way any of us could get any sleep. We just redid his room and it's really cute. And we're going to try to start getting him to sleep in there. We'll see what happens. And one thing I want to say is I think we all can look back and wish we've done things differently.
Mm-hmm.
I think any way you can feed your baby, as long as your baby's fed and healthy, that's all that matters. If you want to try breastfeeding, try it. If you don't. I think ultimately it's important for the mom to mentally feel good.
Right.
And it's important for the baby to be healthy, and at the end of the day, it's not going to matter if they were breastfed, if they co-slept, if they, like my pediatrician says, they're not going to sleep in your bed when they go to college and maybe. And when you can't tell, nobody asked when you're applying for a job if you were breastfed or not.
Well, and I hope that you two felt that was the message that I was trying to give you, because I didn't want you to, you did anyway, but I didn't want you to have the experience of feeling guilty because you were having trouble breastfeeding or whatever, because that's what I believe that very much too. And a pediatrician once told me when I took you, and you both were hard to potty train, and I took you to the doctor because you were 3 and still in a diaper and enjoying it very much. And you had a pacifier. And he said to me, you can either worry about this or think about when she graduates from high school, she's not going to be in a diaper and have a pacifier. And after he said that, I took a much more relaxed position on it. And I really didn't worry about it. I gave up with Laurel. I just gave up. I was trying to potty train her, and I remember I had this potty training book, and you were supposed to put the kid on the potty and give him M&Ms. And you had to do this for an entire day. And by the end of the day, she was in tears. I'm in tears. I took the book, I ripped it in half, threw it across the room, put a diaper on her, and I said, it's going to be your husband's problem. And she really,
I am potty trained now.
Yes, when she was ready, she came to me with the diaper. Mom, I don't want to wear this disgusting thing anymore. And okay, I have some really pretty little panties for you. Oh, great. And that was it. I didn't have to do a thing.
I more than got my karma, so.
Well, I think for all of us, I don't know how much you tried with your oldest, but I feel like with mine, because I had, heard your perspective and I knew that your kids were slow potty trainers, I just didn't stress about it too much with mine. And my daughter is so stubborn. I didn't even try to force her because she's one of those people, it's got to be her idea or she's not going to do it. And I knew if I tried to force her, it was just going to be a fight. And so she was almost 4 by the time she potty trained, but it was on her timeline. She decided, and I think she started peeing on the potty first, and then she started pooping on the potty, and it was her daycare that was like, just send her in undies and pack a lot of extra ones. And they said, we think she'll be potty trained by the end of the week. And she was. And so we have a tradition where for different things, there's a fairy, and a fairy comes for the passy. So the diaper fairy came and took her baby diapers away and left a toy, and she loved it. And we did the same thing when she was ready to get rid of the passy. The passy fairy came and brought her a very nice toy. And so my son now, he's starting to, like, he's been potty training at school, and every day they're like, he's using the toilet all day. So we'll probably start that with him. But again, I've just tried not to stress about it because
it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. They'll do it.
It's
eventually.
The nature of the beast. I think that's what one of my pediatricians said to me. He said, it's the nature of the human being that if everything else is normal, that this will work itself out, because they get to a point where they don't want to feel dirty or whatever. I loved that guy. He saved me a lot of anxiety. He really did.
I had a more relaxed idea too, especially dealing with what I was dealing with. And I have the sort of same thing as Rachel. His school was sending me notes home. Why are you sending him in diapers? He's potty trained. And okay. So I started sending him to school in underwear, and I guess they know what they're doing there, and they have them on a schedule. And so he was potty trained at school. And then he would come home, and the minute he got in the door, he would strip down. And it was like, as long as he was naked, he knew to go potty. But if he was wearing clothes, he would sometimes forget, and he'd wet himself. That was the situation. Night training was a whole different issue. And I left him to figure that out for himself. But he was pretty old before he would stay dry at night. But he pretty much potty trained himself. And he figured out, if I'm naked, and this was when he still wasn't talking, so he couldn't really communicate any of this, but he had it all figured out. And then my younger one I thought would be easy, but he was even more difficult. And honestly, he ended up with a medical condition because he was pee trained, but he got very backed up and constipated. We ended up in the hospital in the middle of the night, which was horribly traumatic. And he was holding it, he wouldn't go, and then when he did, he was hiding it. It was just bad. And so finally we got through that situation, and he's perfectly fine now. But so there's always something. The other thing, we'll touch on, and I'm alone in this at this table, but on this topic, I cloth diapered both my children. And I loved doing that. I absolutely loved it. But with my younger son, I had to get to a point where I stopped. And for a while, I was, especially at night, we were doing pull-ups at night. And then during the day, I had to figure out, I went, I don't know, Walmart or somewhere, and I found clearance underwear and bought a whole bunch of them. And because I couldn't deal with it. I got to this point where I was like, I can't clean this. I can't deal with it. And I just had to be okay with throwing them away. And yeah.
I actually did cloth diapers with Laurel.
Did you have a choice?
And they were much different back then. You were dealing with pre-folds and pins. They're very fancy.
They were the white. It wasn't like those little things that you had with the snaps and all of that. Yeah. This was with a pin.
A pin, yeah.
But we had a diaper service. So what you were supposed to do is you were supposed to change your child, put the dirty diapers, not do anything to them, just put them into this bin. And then once a week, they would come and pick them up. Oh my God, that was god awful. It really, the guy came to pick them up and I said, you don't need to come back. And I went to disposable diapers, which in those days weren't the greatest. You have to really change the diaper constantly, whereas today they're all these engineered with all this absorbing and all of that, and that they weren't like that then. But boy, it was better than that diaper bin thing. Oh, that was horrible. So when you said you were going to cloth diaper your kids, I was horrified.
Everybody tried to talk to me out of it, but I really stuck to it. I cloth diapered for, probably 10 years across the two of them. And I think that now there's, first of all, many different brands, and it's gotten to the point where there's Pampers and Huggies. Like there's certain cloth diaper brands that kind of have that name brand. Honestly, my favorites were the China cheapies. That, for those of you who cloth diaper, the Alphas, oh my God, they were amazing. Like those were my favorite. Now, especially my older son peed like crazy, but I would use the bamboo. I liked the bamboo and the charcoal bamboo. So I double up the inserts, and they were pockets and they snapped. Once you figure out how to get them snapped on so they don't leak, like they're wonderful. And they worked better than some of the fancy, expensive name brands that couldn't hold his pee. And they're so cute. And, you know.
This was fun. I hope it's helpful too for people to hear our stories and hear the different perspectives on babies and know that you're doing the best
you can.
The best you can.
I would say as long as your child is happy, is eating and gaining some weight, and is clean and in a clean environment, you're doing a really good job. So pat yourself on the back, because raising children is difficult and none of us are perfect and we all make mistakes. And the most important thing is to learn from your mistakes, and when you bring up the next generation, try to make it so that they do a little bit better than you did. That would be my advice.
You can't anticipate anything, no matter what you think.
No.
God laughs as you make plans. Is that the saying?
Yeah.
Whatever you think it's going to be like, it's not. And no matter how much you think you're prepared for it, you're not. And you never know what those first few months after having a baby are like. You don't realize what you're really going to go through, no matter how prepared you think you are, how many books you read, how many decisions you've made. They're going to change. Things are going to happen. But also know that don't let the doctors freak you out about stuff. You can get things back on track. Mm-hmm. And I've taken there are certain things I've gone with and certain things I've not gone with. And I was crunchy to a point, but there's certain things I believe in and did that the crunchy people would be up in arms about. I think do what's best for you and be okay with other people doing what's best for them and their kids. They know. I cloth diapered, Rachel didn't. And we each did what was best for us. And
I would say too that don't be afraid to ask for help if you need it. Like the issues that we were talking about around postpartum depression, or even if you're having some thoughts that are disturbing to you, don't be afraid to go and ask for some help.
And if it's too hard to find the help yourself, find someone who can help you find that help.
Go to a doctor or your baby's doctor. And I think that's really important. And also, if you need some respite care, also don't be afraid to ask for that. And I think it's really important, especially in those early months of infancy, which you're totally sleep deprived and it's a hard time.
And know that it's a season. We're all through the baby
It's
season.
true.
And
they're only going to want to sleep with you and cuddle you for so long. I'm at that point
I'm
where
not out of that season yet, but
it's very sad when you don't have that
Yeah.
baby anymore. And to cuddle.
I'm looking at two mothers here who used to be my babies, and it went by very quickly. And I know as you're sitting in it, it doesn't feel like that. But when you get to be my age and you look back on it, it seems like a minute in time. It really does. So try to enjoy it a little bit.
Yeah. Enjoy it. Know it's okay. You're going to have the moments where you don't enjoy it, but also as you get out of the season, the hard nights, they'll fade a little bit too. You'll remember the good stuff more than the difficult stuff.
And some of the difficult stuff will make good stories someday.
Yes. You can tell your child on their wedding day. I have a whole bank of stuff. So, what's good this week? What are you enjoying?
I have been trying to refresh my Spanish language learning. And I had 6 years of it in school and never really put the effort in. I think that I needed to. But once I've started going back through again, it's coming back very quickly. My younger son is in a dual language program, so he learns both in Spanish and English. And then my husband, because of that, who had never studied Spanish, started studying, and now I'm getting back into it too. But so what my good thing or my interesting thing I'm recommending came about because I saw on YouTube that a lot of people who learn English, apparently this is a thing. The way to learn English is to watch Friends. And there's a lot of famous people who learned English specifically by watching Friends. Yeah, so I'll try to find that video and show it to you. And so the thing that so I'm like, what's the Spanish program that I need to watch to learn Spanish? The equivalent of Friends, that sounds great. So I started doing some Googling, and the first show I went with, it's called 31 Minutos, which is like 31 minutes, which I think is supposed to be a play on 60 Minutes. And I don't even want to compare it to Sesame Street, but if you think about Sesame Street in the old days when I was a kid, when they were like little segments and they'd go like on the street and talk to the little kids in the really ugly 80s outfits about something and interview them and stuff. So it's one of these little sock puppets. And it's like a little news story, and they're like a newsroom, and they go out and interview people and have these ridiculous child interest stories. I couldn't even get through the 31 minutes. I mean, I got through about half of it. I'm like, okay, I'm over this. This is not how I'm going to learn. And also, I'm someone who I watch English with the subtitles. And I also really rely on people's mouths, I've realized. And so not having a puppet doesn't have a mouth. And even in animation, they approximate what a mouth would look like. Yeah, that wasn't working for me. I needed real people. So I went through a couple other possibilities, and then I landed on La Casa de Flores, which is House of Flowers. It's on Netscape. No, not, oh my God, how old am I? It's on Netflix, so you guys can watch it. And they actually do have it in English also, but I'm watching it in the original Spanish with subtitles. My husband calls it a telenovela, but it really isn't. It takes itself a little more seriously than a telenovela does, which is very soap opera ridiculous. Yeah. But it has all those stories, like it's very soapy in its storylines, but it's more drama like, but it's funny. And so I'm listening to it in Spanish, and I've got the English subtitles on, and I'm just hoping it's going through me in osmosis. And then I guess you're supposed to go back through and watch it with the Spanish subtitles, and then you're supposed to watch it just in Spanish. But I'm enjoying the story. It's a good story, so I think you guys would both enjoy it.
How about you?
I have a cute story to tell.
Okay.
We took care of Laurel's sons a couple weekends ago, and her youngest son liked to watch the Olympics with me. And he particularly liked the swimming and the diving and the running. We watched it the night they got here to stay with us. And then the next day, we spent most of the day in the pool. And so he was coming up with all of these games to play in the pool. And I was sitting in a chair, in one of those pool chairs. So he got in the other pool chair and he said, okay, we're going to have a race. So we raced in the chairs and he was winning with the chairs. So then he says, Nana, let's race without the chairs. So I said, okay. And I got out of the chair and he says, and look, Nana, I'm going to give you a 10-second head start, okay? Because you're probably going to need that. And I said, okay.
Wow.
So he gives me a 10-second head start and I won the race.
No.
So he's looking at me and he goes, wow, Nana, I never thought you'd be able to swim like that. And he says, okay, let's do it again. And he says, this time I'm not giving you a 10-second head start. I said, okay. So we race and I won. And he's going, Nana, you're old. How can you swim like that? And I said, honey, I've been swimming for a long time. And he said, but Nana, look, you're 76. I'm 9. And he says, all right, I'm telling you what we're going to have to do. He said, this time we're going to do 3 laps straight. And then we have to do 3 laps around the pool.
Oh,
so I said, you won.
Oh my goodness. That's funny. Mine this week, we finished my son's room. We've been redoing it because he's obsessed with planets. I've mentioned that before. And so he has a new bed and we painted one of the walls black. I sent you guys a picture and we did some like finger painting with white paint. And we got these decals of the planets to put on all the walls. And then we put glow-in-the-dark stars all over the walls. And he hasn't slept in it yet. But the other night, I got up in the middle of the night to let the dogs out. And I went in his room to see what it looked like at night. And it was just magical. It looks like the universe. So I'm really excited for him to see it at night and sleep in it. So we're going to try. We're going to try to get him to sleep in his room. I may be sleeping in there with him for a while. Thank you for chatting and our discussion today.
And if you're enjoying us, share us with your friends and family or anyone you think might be interested in listening to us.
Leave a rating or review.
Subscribe. And we'll see you next time.